Would you like to get updated with the latest episode of AnimeKouhai Tensura spoiler series? It's episode number 336, volume 14, chapter 2, part 5, entitled, Rimuru interrogates the Imperial side about the Empire's internal division. Support the channel and you will have access to 3 episodes per week. Check out her Patreon page if you get a chance.
I got a lot of experience running from my opponents, you know.
Oh yes, you do, don't you? Then go make me proud, Datta.
With that, Rimuru shut off the thought communication. The monster armies now had their marching orders. Everyone fell quiet, collecting their thoughts.
Alright, we're finally up. Let's get this camp cleared out and get moving.
Datta's command roared across the cave, and with it, the monster army began moving as a single entity. As I gave the order to Testarosa's group, the main thought on my mind was this isn't exactly what I was expecting. Part of me began to wonder if they thought we were being too hasty but couldn't say anything about it. Which, I mean, I get it. If you want to be all majestic as a demon lord, it's not natural to act like you're freaking out. I think I handled that the right way with them, but I couldn't be sure. Still, it's amazing how much I can count on Testarosa. She's such a refined woman, and I was confident she'd make sure the Empire knew just how dignified a ruler I was. She said she was going to annihilate the Imperial army, but I wondered if she was serious about that? She couldn't be, really? But then again, she and Diablo are like 2 peas in a pod. That made her a big handful for me, too, and it made me realize she was probably being serious. These primals are extremely dangerous. Maybe I should stop her. But it's too late for that, isn't it? This is war. You'll have all the time in the world to pity your adversary after you win. Besides, I was already seeing some unexpected benefits there. By that, I'm talking about Datta's growth. Maybe it's because I'd put him in a position of responsibility, but I could tell he was making a serious effort to live up to it. He really became a man, I guess, and the more he grew, the easier things would be for me. I wanted him to keep up the good work, but I was afraid he might step on a landmine pretty soon. Yes, it had been fun to watch as a spectator, but before Testarosa got really angry, I thought maybe Datta ought to be let in on the joke. With this in mind, I spoke up.
Ranga, you there?
At once.
Ranga popped out from my shadow, tail wagging and looking all cute. I had an urge to sidle up and take a nap in his fluff, but I had to hold back.
Ranga, team up with Datta and protect him if anything happens.
His tail froze mid-wag. After a moment of silence, he replied, sounding rather dejected.
I understand, my lord. When do you want me to leave?
He was kind of acting like a kid who didn't want to go on a car trip. It didn't take more than a moment's thought to realize what he was thinking, but my orders remained unchanged. As long as we didn't know what the Empire was fully capable of, Datta, and Datta alone, remained a concern of mine.
Right now, if you could, please.
I am off, then.
With a hangdog look, pardon the pun, Ranga patted off. Did he hate being away from me that much?
Thanks. I'm counting on you, okay? Datta's gotten a lot more reliable lately, but I'll feel so much better if you're there for him.
I felt kind of like a heel, but for now, I needed him to pitch in. So I gave him a few more parting words, and he immediately reacted.
Leave this to me, my lord.
Now he seemed to be glowing with motivation. His footsteps, languid up to now, were accelerating into a brisk trot. He can cast spatial transport anyway, so I was sure he'd make it to Datta and the gang before they departed. Quite a relief.
So we're gonna be negotiating with the Empire, but it's all but guaranteed our talks are gonna break down. Once they do, we plan to declare war on the spot and start fighting immediately. In which case, how should we position our forces?
By the sound of Testarosa, we were definitely about to have war on our hands. I'd really like to avoid it, but it's impossible. If they've marched this deep into our lands, I sincerely doubted they'd go back without doing anything. At the very least, we'd need to tango with them one time, in order to show off our powers. But we were facing a tank battalion, an unknown force. An ill-advised strategy could seriously cost us. We had to decide on our plan carefully. And that was exactly the moment when Benimaru would come into play.
If Testarosa's negotiations lead to war, our city will be immediately isolated inside the labyrinth.
He told me.
In that case, we'd better call Ramirez.
Indeed. We've come this far. The war is about to start. I don't think she's going to be bored much longer.
I feel it's wrong to think of war as entertainment, but this is where a monster's way of thinking differs from a human's, I suppose.
So?
As we planned, our city would be protected by the labyrinth, the world's best defensive structure. We'd be fighting on our turf, and I'd like to believe that gave us the initiative. The problem was Datta's force.
If you think about it, the two forces are well out of proportion with each other. but at the same time, the enemy is amassed into a gigantic ball, and along those lines, we can think of these tanks as a single monster. If anything, we have the advantage.
That, and as Benimaru confidently explained, the supply troops who came with the tanks didn't really even count as hostiles. I wasn't so sure about that, but his self-assured words were very convincing. I decided to hear him out.
However, if we deploy our forces too widely, they might fall victim to the tank's fire. I made a calculation of their estimated power based on the knowledge you shared with me, Sir Rimuru, and the results convince me that the green numbers won't be able to stand up to it. Thus, for our first sortie against the Empire, I'd like to deploy the Goblin Riders alone.
Huh? Isn't that a bit harsh?
Do you want to challenge them with only 100 mounted forces?
That's right. We will begin with that, to see how things go. If the enemy's tanks are as I predict, we can win if we send the whole army into battle, but if they exceed our expectations, we will have to rethink our strategy at that point. So either way, we have to try to fight them, and when we do, I don't want to needlessly rack up casualties.
Benimaru coolly laid it out for me. As he put it, the goblins would be used as a touchstone, and if things really went south, Datta and his riders would wind up sacrificial lambs. But Benimaru was unfazed. In fact, he made this cold, calculated decision precisely because it'd be the most efficient thing to do.
So what'll happen to them in the worst case scenario?
I've told them to use shadow motion to retreat as they see fit.
Aha. And there was another reason why he couldn't deploy the green numbers, huh? Benimaru was making his estimates of the tank's performance based on my memory, or my knowledge, I guess. But everything I knew about tanks had come from what I'd seen on TV, essentially, so it was all pretty vague. But I also had a powerful ally in Raphael, so as vague as my knowledge was, I thought I was able to give Benimaru some pretty accurate specs. In addition to that, we already had visual confirmation of what the Empire's tanks looked like. We knew the length and caliber of their guns, and we were also aware of the sub-weapons they were equipped with, a bit like machine guns. They manufactured these with otherworlder expertise, I'm sure, so it should be similar in operation. Their power and performance were unknown, but as we figured, if we just paid attention to the stuff we should be wary of, it'd all work out. Benimaru's estimations and Raphael's calculations were within the margin of error to each other. It was safe to say that Benimaru's plan was the right way. It was certainly better than anything an amateur like me could come up with anyway. His plan was as follows. First, as soon as the battle begins, the 100-strong Goblin Rider cavalry will charge in unison. They'll take advantage of their high-speed maneuverability, using erratic movements to give the tank guns no chance to aim. In this way, they should be able to avoid direct hits. Given their small size, they'll be able to nimbly respond to any situation. In fact, if they're lucky enough, they could use a stick-and-move approach to toy with their foes. Hearing all that, I was convinced. If you're scared, Benimaru apparently told Datta's team, you lose. Of course, you never knew what would happen on the battlefield. The enemy might try pulling something wild on us, and there was every chance they'd score a lucky hit or two. I know he said that nobody's gonna die as long as they don't score a direct hit, but you never know until you pop open the lid. That was why we had to make sure everyone understood to retreat immediately in an emergency.
But running away, keep in mind, is the last thing any of us want to do. I'd never allow them to sully your prestigious name, Sir Rimuru.
Now I was more afraid of Benimaru than the Empire.
Well, don't make them do anything rash, okay?
I'm afraid that's impossible. In war, if you want to win, it's the polite thing to give it your all.
Benimaru briskly smiled at me, no hesitation on his face. That was cool and all, but I had mixed feelings. I understood his point of view, but he was making it sound inevitable that someone was gonna get whacked out there. I don't really give a crap about my prestige. Having it helps keep my nation's name protected and all, but if we got ourselves killed to save our good name, wasn't that defeating the purpose? Like, I just didn't want to see any of my friends hurt, so? Well, let's just assume the worst and make sure the Third Corps is on standby, ready to be transported in at any time. If I was fighting this myself, I thought with an uneasy look in my eye, I'd never have to worry about any of this. Lieutenant General Gaster, Calgario's confidant and leader of the armored division, was commanding the Magitank force for this expedition. He was a muscular and fearless man in his mid-30s, and right then he was on the rear guard, sitting back in his state-of-the-art command vehicle and enjoying the atmosphere of the battlefield. The forest around him was as unchanged as always, with nothing to block their way. Gaster, who had grown accustomed to this scenery, began mulling over the fame he would gain from this battle. I'm going to defeat the armed nation of Dwargon, an impregnable fortress for over 1,000 years, and Gazel himself, the heroic king. How thrilling can this get? In his mind, he envisioned all the people cheering for him. It'd be the birth of a new champion who would go down in history as one of the greatest of all time. Just dreaming about it made Gaster's heart soar. The man who defeated Gazel, the heroic king, would have the epithet hero applied to him for eternity. It'd come in the not-too-distant future, guaranteed to happen. Gaster's Magitank force had enough war power to make sure of that. 2,000 of these magical tanks were now lined up, moving in well-drilled unison. Their formation as they lumbered across the plains at the foot of the mountains was divided into 20 horizontal rows, each with 100 tanks. It was a magnificent view, and Gaster couldn't have been happier to see it, but he was already falling into his opponent's hands. Each of these tanks was around 35 feet long by 12 feet wide, and with 2,000 of them out at once, they couldn't just go anywhere. Gaster deployed his troops in the exact location he had surveyed in advance, and that, it turned out, was exactly where Rimuru and his advisors had expected them to be. Gaster had no idea this was going to happen, but he was an excellent soldier nonetheless. He was a lieutenant general, and as such, his personal combat skills were formidable. As he saw it, he was as good as any knight in the Imperial Guardians. The only reason I haven't been selected, he reasoned, is because I haven't had a chance to participate in ranking duels. Being in charge of a division like this is akin to being on military duty all the year through. That irked him mightily. Of course, a lieutenant general is a high-ranking position. There were only a handful in the Empire, akin in social status to high-ranking nobility. He was well out of reach of the common person, no doubt, but that wasn't enough to satisfy Gaster. Someday, he would replace Calgurio and become a full-fledged commander himself, and then he'd be a hero. Gaster was an ambitious man. Honor, not money, mattered to him. That was why he volunteered to wage the decisive battle against the heroic King Gazel instead of conquering the labyrinth. And Gaster had more than enough ability to back up that ambition. He possessed the unique skill Performer, which gave him command over any sort of audio phenomena, allowing him to analyze situations in detail simply by listening to the sound around him. He could also use special sound waves to issue specific commands to people, leading his allies even in the middle of chaotic battle. It was the greatest power an army officer could desire, but that wasn't all. Performer could also be used as a vicious attack. Gaster could manipulate sound waves and manipulate them at will, using a sonic cannon to destroy the very cells of his foes. Clearly, Gaster was one of the most powerful people in the Empire. The Guardians might be strong and all, but only if they bear the legendary gear granted to them by the Emperor. I deserve those weapons and armor far more than any of them. If he could only get his hands on that legend-class gear, he confidently believed, he, too, could join the lofty ranks of the single digits.
That's it for this video, guys. Thank you for always watching my videos and supporting my channel. Shout out to the new members of AnimeKouhai supporters: Vicente Baharias, Stephen Duplessis, Joshua Andrade, Jaya Keshav, Edmond, Zachary Shui, Mikey Avila, Omar, L, Gary Miles. Thank you so much for helping out. I'll see you guys in the next video.